friends, after watching episode 8, I think I found the most realistic theory about the digital circus. Not just details or assumptions that don't prove anything, but something that fully explains everything about the digital circus. Pomni was never really trapped, and no one in the circus actually has a real way to escape. If you want to know why, stay, because this theory is gonna blow your mind. If you stop and think about it for a second, there are way too many things in the digital circus that simply don't have a clear explanation. For example, the characters have been there for who knows how long, and yet they don't need anything to survive, to stay alive. And even worse, in all that time, no one has managed to get out. So, can you escape the circus or not? To answer that, we need to understand this first. Most people have assumed that all these characters are mentally trapped inside the circus, meaning that somewhere in the real world, their bodies still exist, connected to that system. It actually makes sense, and it sounds like the simplest explanation. Real people trapped inside a virtual environment. But there's a problem. There are details that don't fit that theory. The more you observe the digital circus, the more obvious it becomes that this doesn't work like a simple person trapped inside a virtual reality game. Because if their bodies really existed in the real world, they would need to eat, sleep, and stay alive somehow. But inside the circus, that simply doesn't happen. They even say it themselves.
Well, not really, because we don't need to eat, drink, or sleep in this digital world. So the digital food here only gives off the virtual sensation of eating, without any of the nutritional benefits.
They don't need it. And that's extremely strange, because then how are their physical bodies still alive? But the most disturbing detail comes when we supposedly see the real world. We see a computer, a virtual headset, and an empty chair. So, if no one's sitting there, what is it that actually stayed inside the circus? Well, to understand what might be happening here, we need to look at a story that already did exactly this before. Soma. In Soma, we follow Simon Jarrett, a man who agrees to undergo a brain scan as part of an experimental treatment, something that in theory shouldn't have consequences. But after that process, he wakes up in a completely different place. And still, he can think, feel, and exist. That's when he discovers the truth. What exists in that place is a copy of his consciousness, a version of them that believes it's the original. And while that copy keeps living, thinking it can escape, the real Simon was never there. And this is where everything starts to take a much darker shape, because this is exactly what could be happening in the digital circus. They're not people trapped trying to escape, they're copies that believe they once belonged to a real body. And when you start putting the pieces together, you realize this isn't just a theory. It's a pattern. First, they don't need to eat. Second, how Pomni enters. We know she put on a headset in an abandoned place. A space where there's clearly nothing that guarantees her body could stay alive for hours, days, or however long her existence inside the circus lasts. So with that, the idea that there's a body waiting outside no longer makes sense. Because then, how would she still be alive? Third, the chair. That moment is key, because it's not just any detail. We see the real world, but the chair is empty. No one is connected. And a lot of people probably overlooked that, but it could be a clue. And finally, we have the characters' behavior, especially their breakdowns. That constant feeling of not knowing who they really are, not even remembering their past. And when you put all these pieces together, you end up with one clear explanation. They are not trapped. They are versions that never left, meaning no one was transported into the circus. Their consciousness was copied. How? Right at the moment they put on the headset, they didn't just start playing. Their minds were scanned and duplicated. And while that copy woke up inside the circus, believing it was the original, the real person simply left. They took off the headsets and went back to their normal life. And well, friends, this actually makes sense, and it's deeply disturbing. Because if this is true, then the real version of them is already gone. The original person was never trapped and has no idea any of this ever happened. And if you really stop and think about it, this goes way beyond horror. Because then, what are the characters really? If their memories aren't theirs, if their past was lived by someone else, then it's just a borrowed identity. What's crazy is that the characters clearly can't feel. So, what would happen if they discovered the truth? Well, at that point, it wouldn't even matter whether they can escape or not. Because even if they found a way out, where would they go? There's no body waiting for them, no place to return to. Their only fate would be to remain in the circus. And the most unsettling part is that when you look at the characters with this in mind, everything starts to make sense. Kinger isn't crazy. Kinger knows something he doesn't want to share. There are moments where he's completely lucid, like he understands a truth the others wouldn't be able to handle. And that's why he lives like that, as if staying in the dark is the only way to avoid breaking completely. Then Jax. He's not just sarcastic or chaotic. He feels like someone who's avoiding something. Like he knows there's something worse outside. Or like the circus is more bearable than whatever he left behind. And then there's Gangle, who really confuses us because of the way she is. Because if all of the digital circus were fake, if they were just worthless copies, then why does Gangle suffer in such a real way? Why do her emotions feel so real? Well, because they are. It doesn't matter if it's a copy. What she feels is still real. They're not just characters trapped inside a world. They are real consciousness, trying to make sense of their existence in a place where there may have never been an exit to begin with. And now let's go back to the question from earlier. What would happen if they discovered the truth? Imagine for a second that Pomni fully understands what's going on, that there's no body waiting for her, and no one looking for her outside. Imagine Kinger confirming what he's already suspected. That's why he avoids thinking too much, because deep down, he already knows the answer. Imagine Jax facing not only his past, but realizing he's not even the original one who made those mistakes. Well, would it even be worth escaping knowing all of that? And this is where the theory stops being just a theory and starts looking like something that could actually be real. Maybe the problem was never finding the exit. Maybe they were never trapped. And well, friends, this was the theory that could explain what's really happening inside the digital circus. All the clues and details we saw line up way too well, and that's why Kane does everything he can to make them forget about the idea of escaping. And now, I'm wondering, if they're just copies of real consciousness, were the abstracted characters simply erased? Let me know what you think about this theory, and if you have another explanation, we'll be reading you in the comments.